What's the history behind SMIs, and how do we build around them as a staff and as a culture?
SMI stands for Strategic Momentum Initiative. It started off as a joke that we were calling them that, and then it stuck because it actually works and it's pretty huge. In the first year or two of the church, we had no real understanding of cycles and rhythms and ebbs and flows. And when the attendance started to drop for the first time ever, it was really our second summer before that happened in a big way, I thought the church had collapsed. I thought we had lost God's favor. The Ichabod was written in the place where elevation used to be. And then I just started talking to some friends, and they were like, yeah, it's June. Nobody goes to church in June. They'll be back. And I was like, but in my heart, I doubt that they will. And they were like, they'll be back. Just watch, they'll be back. And sure enough, they were. And here they come in the fall. And then they came for a couple months that fall. And then the attendance dropped again in October. And I was like, oh, God, here we go. And it took me a few of those to realize that, you know, the idea, and I think Rick Warren popularized this, the idea that church growth and momentum and building a church is like surfing waves, and you can't control when the waves come. You can only ride them when they do and position yourself for them. And so we don't create waves, we ride waves. And when you try to make momentum happen, you can certainly create momentum, as we talk about in another session, that you can do things to create and sustain momentum and to tweak and to enhance momentum. But we realized that there are really only a couple times a year that the church is going to grow in a big way. Provided that we don't launch a new campus or open a building. You can do certain things to defy that. But typically the church grows in January and in August for us. And it grows, sometimes it grows for a week or two after Easter. But that's not really a long-term growth typically if you look at our numbers. And I'm talking about us. I'm not talking about every church. Knowing that, we know that we have a great growth spurt in January, a great growth spurt in August. And the rest of the year, there may be some peaks and valleys, but those are the two times when people are really in gear to come back to church. I don't know that it's necessarily that new people are coming to church as much sometimes as everybody who kind of irregularly goes to church tries to get back in a pattern, and because they all come at one time, your attendance goes up. Sometimes I think it's because just the mindset of people that we need to get back in church. They're starting new patterns, they're starting new rhythms, school's back in, things like that. But we know that we have to plan and prepare around those. And so if we can start a new campus, we need to do it in the beginning of the fall or in January or as close to those as we can, those windows as we can. And by saying, these are our SMIs, these are our strategic momentum initiatives, it kind of lets us do what we talk about in another of these sections to say, we're going to drive down the stakes and strengthen them during some of these seasons where the church growth may be a little flatter. So we're not trying to add worship experiences. We're not trying to add small groups because we're coming up maybe on the summer or we're coming up on a holiday season. And so during those times, we got to focus on systems, structures, hires, communication, spot checking, and all of these things that are important, making level paths. During the growth times, we got to increase capacity, and we've got to be thinking, how do we add? And how do we grow? And how do we prepare? And so you can kind of predict those rhythms and waves and build to them a little bit. And also, if you understand those times when the church isn't necessarily growing for a couple of months, you don't see it as a lull, but you just see it as an opportunity to prepare again, expand, contract. Expand, contract. And you say, I'm going to have a mindset that we're always growing, but just sometimes we're growing out, sometimes we're growing down, but we're always growing. And when we're growing down, it's to prepare for the next season of growing out. So embracing the rhythms versus fighting against them has really helped me to realize that there are some seasons where we need to breathe, Selah, pause, let it sit, drill down, let some things replenish. The Bible is clear that God designed the world in cycles. 6 days you work, on the seventh day you rest. God has that built into the agricultural system. You're not supposed to reap every year. You're supposed to let your fields replenish and not sow and plow them up. You're supposed to allow your body to do it. You're supposed to allow your fields to do it. So it stands to reason you got to let your church sometimes do that. And we try to use those times when we can.